Well, the United States is not very good at accepting the idea that other countries have red lines. We think it's our way or the highway. That's certainly been the case on the nuclear enrichment issue. We were forced to compromise somewhat on that issue with the JCPOA. The Israelis didn't like that, and they, I think, convinced Trump that the JCPOA was therefore a bad agreement, and he, of course, pulled out of it in 2018. But I think what's most interesting here is that what the Americans want to do is they want to start by negotiating on the nuclear issue, the nuclear enrichment issue, as you put it. But with the latest proposal that's come out of Iran, they've moved the nuclear enrichment table to number 3 on the list of issues that have to be dealt with. They say that, first of all, what we have to do is we have to have a meaningful peace. We have to shut down this conflict, and there has to be some guarantee that the United States and Israel are not going to attack Iran again. That's the first demand. The second demand is that they'll then talk about the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, it's very clear that they are going to maintain control of the Strait of Hormuz for as far as the eye can see. So they're not going to make any concessions to us on that one. And then number 3, they'll be willing to talk about the nuclear issue. So in other words, you have to basically shut down the conflict, then deal with the issue of the strait, and then we can talk about the nuclear issue. This is not what the Americans want. The Americans want that nuclear issue front and center. But all of this shows you that as time goes by, the Iranians feel more and more confident about their position. This gets back to my earlier point about the smiling faces in the meeting in St. Petersburg. And as I've said many times on this show, time is on Iran's side. There's no rush, in my opinion, for Iran to cut a deal. Just let time go by and let the economic consequences of this war take effect. And that will put greater and greater pressure on the Americans to settle. And that'll give the Iranians more leverage. So what you see happening here is, with this new 3-point plan, the Iranians are actually driving a harder bargain. And of course, President Trump is deeply dissatisfied with this new 3-point proposal that the Iranians have put forward, because, as I said, he wants to get the nuclear issue settled first.
You just heard Professor John Mearsheimer, University of Chicago political scientist and one of America's sharpest critics of liberal interventionism, deliver a shocking reality. Iran has completely flipped the nuclear negotiation script, and Trump is furious. Mearsheimer explains that the United States has always operated on a simple principle. We think it's our way or the highway. The U.S. doesn't accept that other countries have red lines. This was especially true on nuclear enrichment. The only exception was the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, where the U.S. was forced to compromise somewhat. But Israel hated that compromise. And, as Mearsheimer reveals, the Israelis didn't like that, and they convinced Trump that the JCPOA was a bad agreement. So Trump pulled out of it in 2018. Now, Iran has responded with a bold new strategy that completely upends American expectations. Let's examine what the Americans wanted. Mearsheimer states plainly, what the Americans want to do is they want to start by negotiating on the nuclear issue. Nuclear enrichment was always Washington's top priority. The U.S. wanted to dictate terms, stop enrichment, limit centrifuges, allow inspections, all before discussing anything else. This was the American approach for years. It was the foundation of U.S. policy. But now Iran has said no more. Mearsheimer reveals Iran's stunning reversal. With the latest proposal that's come out of Iran, they've moved the nuclear enrichment table to number 3 on the list of issues. This isn't just a negotiation tactic. This is a strategic declaration. Iran is saying, you don't get to set the agenda anymore. The days of our way or the highway are over, and the U.S. doesn't know how to respond. So what is Iran's new 3-point plan? Mearsheimer explains the revolutionary shift. First priority, we have to have a meaningful peace. We have to shut down this conflict, and there has to be some guarantee that the United States and Israel are not going to attack Iran again. This is groundbreaking. Iran is putting security guarantees first, before nuclear talks, before economic sanctions, before anything. They're saying, we won't discuss nukes until you guarantee you won't attack us. This directly challenges U.S. hegemony, because guarantees against future attacks would limit America's freedom of action. It would constrain U.S. military options. It would force Washington to respect Iranian sovereignty. And as Mearsheimer notes, this is not what the Americans want, but Iran is setting the terms. Now let's examine Iran's second priority. Mearsheimer reveals, the second demand is that they'll then talk about the Strait of Hormuz. But there's a catch. Iran isn't negotiating control of the strait. Mearsheimer is clear. It's very clear that they're going to maintain control of the Strait of Hormuz for as far as the eye can see. So they're not going to make any concessions to us on that one. This is strategic brilliance. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil choke point. 30% of seaborne oil passes through it. By claiming control as non-negotiable, Iran is securing its strategic position, guaranteeing leverage over global energy markets, establishing itself as a regional power that cannot be ignored. This isn't bargaining. This is declaration of fact. Iran already controls the strait, and they're telling America, this isn't up for discussion. Now let's examine Iran's third priority, the issue Americans thought was first. Mearsheimer states, and then number 3, they'll be willing to talk about the nuclear issue. This sequence is revolutionary. For decades, the U.S. treated nuclear enrichment as the only issue. Now Iran is saying, we'll discuss nukes, but only after you guarantee peace and accept our control of the strait. This flips the entire negotiation framework. Mearsheimer emphasizes, in other words, you have to basically shut down the conflict, then deal with the issue of the strait, and then we can talk about the nuclear issue. This isn't just changing the order of talks. This is redefining power dynamics. Iran is no longer the supplicant. It's the power setting terms. And the U.S. must accept Iran's agenda or walk away from negotiations. Why is Iran so confident in this new position? Mearsheimer reveals the strategic truth. As time goes by, the Iranians feel more and more confident about their position. This gets to Mearsheimer's core argument. Time is on Iran's side. Unlike the U.S., which faces political cycles and election pressures, Iran can afford to wait. Mearsheimer explains, there's no rush, in my opinion, for Iran to cut a deal. Just let time go by and let the economic consequences of this war take effect. What economic consequences? Rising U.S. inflation from energy prices, European economic stagnation, global supply chain disruptions, growing U.S. budget deficits. These pressures will intensify over time, and as they do, they'll put greater and greater pressure on the Americans to settle, and that'll give the Iranians more leverage. Iran doesn't need to make concessions. It just needs to wait. Mearsheimer connects this to a telling observation. This gets back to my earlier point about the smiling faces in the meeting in St. Petersburg. What does he mean? At recent diplomatic meetings, Iranian officials have appeared calm and confident. They're not desperate. They're not anxious. They're smiling because they know something crucial. The longer this goes on, the stronger their position becomes. Mearsheimer states plainly, what you see happening here is with this new three-point plan, the Iranians are actually driving a harder bargain. This is the opposite of what U.S. officials expected. They thought sanctions would break Iran. Instead, Iran is using time as a weapon. And with each passing month, Iran's leverage grows while America's diminishes. This isn't just negotiation strategy. This is a fundamental shift in power dynamics. Now consider Trump's reaction to this new reality. Mearsheimer states, President Trump is deeply dissatisfied with this new three-point proposal that the Iranians have put forward. Why? Because Trump wanted to get the nuclear issues settled first. This was Trump's entire approach. He thought he could replicate the North Korea playbook, threaten military action, demand nuclear concessions, claim victory, but Iran isn't North Korea. Iran has leverage. Iran has options. Iran has time. And Iran has said, not on your terms. Trump's frustration reveals a deeper problem. The U.S. doesn't know how to negotiate from a position of weakness. For decades, America dictated terms. Now, for the first time, another nation is setting the agenda. And Washington doesn't know how to respond. Mearsheimer's analysis reveals a fundamental shift in global power dynamics. The U.S. has always operated on the assumption that other nations must accept American red lines. The U.S. sets the negotiation agenda. Nuclear issues come first, always, but Iran has shattered this assumption. By putting peace guarantees first, Iran has exposed the true issue. American aggression, not Iranian nukes, is the real problem. Mearsheimer explains, the Iranians feel more and more confident about their position. Why? Because they see U.S. political divisions growing, European economies suffering, global South turning away from Washington, BRICS plus expanding economic alternatives. Iran doesn't need to rush. It just needs to maintain its position. And as time passes, the economic consequences will force America to accept Iran's terms. In conclusion, John Mearsheimer gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real forces shaping these negotiations. Not American strength, not sanctions pressure, but Iran's strategic patience, time working in Iran's favor, the reversal of negotiation priorities, the growing confidence of Iranian negotiators. This isn't just about nuclear talks. This is about whether the U.S. can accept a multipolar world where other nations set their own red lines. Mearsheimer's warning is clear. The U.S. approach of our way or the highway is failing. Iran has flipped the script, and Trump's frustration shows America doesn't know how to respond. Because when time is on your opponent's side, every day makes your position weaker. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
Well, I think this is all disastrous for NATO, or to put it in slightly different terms, for transatlantic relations. And I think the main reason is that President Trump is going to need a scapegoat for this disaster. And I think that the Europeans will probably be the number one scapegoat, because he won't blame Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the person he should blame. And he can't really blame his advisors because none of them were enthusiastic about this. Maybe Pete Hegseth was. Maybe they'll get rid of Pete Hegseth. But I think what he's going to do is he's going to blame the Europeans, and he's going to make the argument that if the Europeans had anteed up, if they had come to our rescue, we would have won the war. The reason we lost was because our allies failed us. And given that situation, what we should do is basically stop supporting them. Will he end the alliance? Just put an end to it? I don't think so. He might. But I think that he will so seriously damage the alliance that in the end, it'll be largely meaningless. The other thing is, Glenn, he has, 2 years and 2 years and 9 months left in his presidency, almost 3 years left. You know how much damage he's done in the first, let's say, 15 months? Can you imagine how much damage he's going to do in the remaining 2 years and 9 months? It's going to be enormous, right? And in the meantime, the Europeans have to come up with some sort of defensive strategy for dealing with the Russians. I mean, you and I think their assessment of the Russian threat is completely overblown. But the fact is, the Russian elites the European elites do believe there's a serious Russian threat there. Let's take that as a given. And they also recognize that they can't rely on the United States anymore. The transatlantic partnership no longer exists. Call this a partnership? It's no longer there. So the Europeans, over the next 2 years and 9 months, have to figure out how to deal with this situation. And that's going to push them to put NATO in the background and not take NATO seriously. So I find it hard to believe that NATO will be a meaningful alliance in January of 2029 when President Trump steps down. Now, one could argue he may step down before then. He could be impeached. He could have medical problems, and J.D. Vance could become president. And who knows what Vance would do. I tend to believe that Vance would have a more positive attitude towards NATO than Trump would. But how much more positive is hard to say. We all remember his Valentine's Day speech in Munich in February of 2025. I mean, Vance didn't look like he was friendly toward Europe then. And if he became president, maybe he wouldn't be once he was in the White House. Who knows for sure? But the future of NATO looks grim, to put it mildly.